life is such a great subject for learning how to draw from life. One of the great things about it is that it's super convenient. You can set up a still life where you live, in a place where nobody's going to touch it. You can work on it over a period of several days, so you don't have to feel rushed and finish it all in one go. The other thing about a still life that's terrific is that you know your objects aren't going anywhere.
Artists have explored still life for centuries. Painters like Chardin, Caravaggio, Cézanne, and Redon each had their own unique style and take on the subject.
I think sometimes still life gets kind of a bad rap. I hear a lot of the time students will say things like, oh, we're doing a still life drawing in my class, so boring, I don't like painting peaches and pears. Well, my answer to that is that a still life is only boring if you let it be boring. If you really take the time to find objects that really interest you, that you're excited to draw, if you take the time to pick the backdrop color, if you take the time to light it so you get beautiful shadows that flow across the composition, you can end up with an image that can be super dynamic and really, really fun to draw. Half of making a still life drawing or painting is actually creating the setup. And it looks really kind of simple. You think, oh, I just get a bunch of objects, I put them together, I draw them. It's actually not that simple. It's not difficult, but there are things that are really good to think about in advance and to plan for that make a huge difference in the end.
Throughout history, artists also chose objects for their symbolic meaning. The Dutch Vanitas paintings were a lot more than just visual displays. Skulls, wilted flowers, and unraveling fruit were seen as symbols of mortality.
The first place you can start in terms of choosing your objects is just look around where you live. So for example, you can go through your kitchen cupboards, you can find cups or glasses, anything that really is interesting to you to draw. Don't pick anything that you don't want to draw. Like if you look at a cup and you think, oh, that would be boring, don't pick it, okay? Pick something that for some reason or another, maybe the shape is interesting to you, maybe you like the color of it. Make sure it's something you really are excited about. My favorite part of choosing objects for a still life is going grocery shopping. I select objects that I think are going to be really interesting for my still life. I always end up with this really funny assortment of objects in my grocery bag, and I always feel like I'm getting these like weird looks from the cashier. They're like, why do you have one onion and one artichoke and one plum and one pear? But it's worth it in the end because you really do get to pick a lot of different kinds of things. You can just walk around outdoors. What's nice about objects from nature is that they tend to have a lot more variation. You really have to think a little bit in advance about how long you want to work on the piece. Because if you're just doing a still life all in one run, you only want to do it in one day, you can pretty much use whatever objects you want. However, if you want to work on a still life for, say, 7 days or so, you want to make sure that you have objects that aren't going to rot on you. Like, for example, I wouldn't get a tomato, I wouldn't use a lime, or even grapes even can rot really quickly. This still life over here is much better for a longer term still life because pretty much everything that you see right here is not going to rot on you anytime soon. If you asked me to draw this still life, I would just be bored to tears. Like, I just would not want to draw this. And I just know as an artist that if I'm bored or if I'm not interested in something, it's not a good experience for me and I'm not going to get a lot out of it. Another reason why it's so important to really carefully choose your objects and really think about their placement in the still life is because if you don't do that and you just kind of grab whatever's around, you just throw it on the table, you start drawing, you can end up with stuff like this where there's just stuff everywhere. It's almost like the still life can't breathe. There's things all over the place. None of the colors are really balanced very well. And this is just a nightmare to draw. So you really want to keep in mind that you really are making your life easier by spending just a little bit of extra time planning in advance what kind of objects you get. When I'm selecting objects for my still life, I think about 4 different aspects. I consider shape, color, texture, and size. So for example, these objects that I have down here are objects that I picked specifically because they have a very particular kind of texture. This surface here is very opaque and very smooth, whereas if you look at this onion that I have, this onion has kind of a very wide range of textures. Like down here at the bottom, this has all these roots down here, which are very rough looking. But then if you look at this part of the onion, there's actually this very bright sheen to it. I really liked these rambutan fruits that I found because they have like these funny hairs on top of them. So these are really fun to look at. I always think it's good to have at least one object that's very large that can really kind of hold the space. Good to have some median objects in the middle and also to have some really tiny objects because they make the larger objects appear to be even bigger. So that's another way you can show the contrast between the objects. These are objects that I've chosen because of their shape. For example, I actually really like using these really long peppers because for one thing, they're really funny the way that they curl up, and really every single pepper is totally different. I also like to choose a couple of objects that are very long, that can kind of cut across the composition like this. So for example, this branch is really terrific because it's super long, and then I can really get some nice diagonals in my composition. I also like this fruit. This is a dragon fruit, and what's really fun about this is that you do have that length of the branch, but you also have the individual dragon fruit, which is very plump and voluptuous looking. I kind of like having objects that also have a lot of mass to them. So for example, this butternut squash is really nice because it has this very large volume at the bottom.
There's one fundamental concept that I want people to understand about color. It's that color is about relationships. It's about how one color affects and reacts to another. I remember when I was in art school and I was studying oil painting, I used to get so frustrated because I always felt like if I could just mix the right blue, everything would work out better in my paintings. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized that there is no right blue. And really what it came down to was creating dynamic relationships between colors, that if I could create those relationships, that the colors would work together to create the visual effects I was looking for. I think about colors the way I think about people, because people develop relationships. We relate to each other in different ways, and we kind of shift our personalities a little bit every time we're with somebody different. Colors are the exact same way. They have different ways of affecting each other. If you take one color, there's no relationship because the red is totally alone. They have nobody they can relate to. Now look what happens if we take yellow and place the yellow with the red. All of a sudden, there's a relationship. The yellow and the red are now speaking to each other. Have you ever had a situation where you were out with a friend and you were having a conversation with them, and then all of a sudden you bump into another friend and they just invite themselves to your conversation, and all of a sudden you're talking about something completely different? The reason why is because the second a third person enters that conversation, you're no longer having the same conversation you were having before. That conversation has changed, and colors are the same way. So right now I have the red and I have the yellow. They're having one conversation. Now look at what happens when blue enters the conversation. Now it's a completely different dynamic. These colors are relating to each other in a way that is totally different than they were before. Look at what happens if I take away the blue. Now we have the yellow and the red. Now, the yellow is so bright that by comparison, the red looks really dark in this particular relationship. If I take the yellow away and I replace it with the blue, all of a sudden, because this blue is so dark, the red looks really bright. Essentially, what's happened here, the red has changed its personality based on what color was next to it. And that's very much the way people are. I think depending on who we're with, we kind of change our personalities a little bit. And that's really the way color works, that every time a new color enters, it's a new conversation.
In color, saturation is basically how intense and bright a color is. So for example, these objects over here have very high saturation. They're super bright. They really leap right out at you. This persimmon is this really brilliant orange color, and so you sort of notice it immediately. I mean, I think about highly saturated colors, it's like they're just starving for attention all the time. They always want you to look at them. Now on this side, you have muted colors, colors that have low saturation. So these are colors that are a lot dimmer, they're much softer, they don't call attention to themselves. And I think a lot of people think about muted colors as being kind of ugly, like oftentimes it looks like puke green or something like that. And so I think sometimes because people are so attracted to the highly saturated colors, they tend to only use these colors. But the thing is, these muted colors, these are like the secret weapon of the highly saturated colors, because these muted colors make these saturated colors look better, because by comparison, these look even brighter. So what you'll see a lot sometimes is an artist will have a painting that has a lot of muddy, muted colors, and then maybe just a couple drops of highly saturated colors. And so because you put them together, because you balance them like that, they make each other better. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of doing tons and tons of color charts, but there is one color theory concept that I think is super useful to know, and that would be complementary color pairs. Complementary colors are basically colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. So there are 3 pairs. There's red and green, blue and orange, and also purple and yellow. And the reason why these colors are so important is that they really create very dramatic color contrast.
Degas really knew how to exploit complementary colors. He oftentimes put them right next to each other. Take a closer look and you'll spot the pairs.
I have red objects on top of a red cloth. I have green objects on top of a green cloth. And if you look at the green objects, the artichoke, it's a little hard to see because it kind of just blends into the green background. And same thing with this red hat, that it's not really easy to see it against the red backdrop. Now, if I take these objects and I switch them like this, so that I have the green objects on this side on top of the red and vice versa on the other side, you can see that that completely changes your ability to see the objects, because all of a sudden you have this kind of vibrancy that happens between the objects and the backdrop. This green pepper really leaps off of that red. This apple is really easy to see against the green backdrop. Try to find those complementary color pairs wherever you see them and just try to emphasize them as much as you can. Another terrific way to get strong color contrast is to place warm colors next to cool colors. The temperature of your color really matters because cool colors have this frosty, almost kind of sterile look to them sometimes. And then warm colors have, of course, this kind of heat to them, this kind of earthiness, which is so different from the cool colors.
Turner used warm and cool colors to give his landscapes layers of depth. His frosty blues are a breath of fresh air against the fiery oranges and yellows.
Warm colors are colors like reds, oranges, yellows, browns. Those are the colors you want to use when you want something to really have kind of a warmth to it. Cool colors are colors like blues, greens, and purples. If you take a warm color and you put it next to a cool color, the difference of temperature creates a really wonderful contrast. So that's another way that you can kind of organize your pieces so that things don't look too similar throughout. When working with color, I think it's really easy to lose track of light and dark contrast. Let's face it, I mean, there's just so many other things to think about when you work with color. You got to think about complementary colors, warm and cool colors. You got to think about saturation. You have to think about how muted your colors are. And so it's so easy to forget that it's really important that you have a very dark, and also very bright highlights in your piece as well.
In the epic painting, The Raft of the Medusa, Jericho used stark light and dark contrast to articulate not just the figures, but also to establish the mood in this horrific scene.
If you look at the objects here, you can see that they're all very dark, but they do have little hints of color. Like, for example, this branch does have a little bit of purple in it. This squash does have a little bit of green. But what they all have in common is that they're very dark colors. Now, on this side, we have very bright colors, okay? We have the whiteness of this cup. You have the lemon. You got to have both, because if you're missing these two, you're going to end up with a piece that's too much in the middle in terms of value. If you're making a still life drawing or painting, take a photo of it, desaturate it so it turns into a black and white image, and ask yourself, when you look at that black and white version of your piece, does it have a really dark and a really bright highlight? And if it doesn't, if it looks really gray, that means that you're not thinking enough about that light and dark contrast. You can lose track of that so quickly. So just keep that in mind when you're working. Remember to think about your backdrop cloth, because if you don't do that, sometimes you can end up with a really distracting background that can really kind of ruin your still life setup. You could use something like fleece or something like felt. Now, these are really good fabrics because they don't absorb a lot of light. There's no sheen to them. If you want to get a little bit more glamorous, you can have something like this, which is very shiny, absorbs a lot of light, and is very dramatic. Some people really like to do patterns. Sometimes that's a good way to spice up the background a little bit more. You got to be careful about patterns though, because sometimes if there's too much of it, it can actually clutter your composition and distract from your objects.
Vermeer was the king of pattern fabrics. He was a master at capturing the pattern and form of the cloth at the same time.
You can just look around, see what you have at home, and sometimes that works. This is just a bath towel. A scarf is always really nice because this is really long and you can kind of drape it across the entire still life in a way. And then even sometimes you can just take like a jacket or something or a shirt or a sweater, and that can work really well as a backdrop too. You can take boxes like this that are at varying heights. And this is a trick that I learned from a family friend who is a caterer. She said she does this all the time, anytime she's hosting a party, because it makes the setup on the table a lot more visually dynamic. I'm going to take one really large cloth just to cover all of them, and then I'm going to put more cloths over that. What I'd like to do next is sort of sculpt the setup a bit. And I'll take my hands and just move it around the cloth so that it's a little bit more taut around those boxes. The next step is to take a second cloth if you want. You don't have to do a second cloth. I just happen to like to change up the color a little bit so it's not all black. See what kinds of patterns and motions you like, because depending on what kind of image you want to make, it's really fun to figure out exactly how you want to make this happen. Start building off your still life with your biggest items. Your largest items are much tougher to place because they're just not going to fit in as many places. So I'm going to take this and stick it up here. And then it's also good to place your really tall items, like for example, this wine glass. So I'm going to place that a little bit lower because if I were to put this all the way up here, then it goes off of my backdrop and I can't see it very well. Take the object and put it against the backdrop. You can see here, the artichoke doesn't look very good on the gray backdrop because the contrast is too low. Whereas if I take the artichoke and I put it in front of the black backdrop, you can really see it much more clearly. Another thing that's great to emphasize anytime you can is a diagonal. So for example, this long purple branch is perfect for that because I can take this shape and really get it to cross throughout the entire composition, or I could get it to do something like this. Now, I'm going to choose to have it go the opposite way. This is the reason why, because already I have the diagonal of this gray cloth, which has already been established. So if I put the branch here, I'm basically just repeating myself. So a better way to do it would be to take it and make this go in the opposite direction. And so you get this kind of crisscross motion. You have the diagonal from the cloth, and then you have the diagonal from the branch, and that tends to balance out a lot better. Anytime you can get your objects to physically interact with each other, that makes for a much more interesting composition. I'm going to take this pepper and I'm going to stick it inside the wine glass, and you can see that creates a really beautiful shape. And play around with placement. I might decide instead that I want it on this side, maybe I want it over here on the front. Another aspect you can push is complementary colors. For example, I have this purple branch, so it would make a lot of sense for me to take this yellow squash and place it right next to the purple branch. One super simple technique that is very effective is overlapping your objects. Overlapping your objects creates an automatic sense of space. I might, for example, take this sweet potato and place it like this, so it's a little bit in front of the persimmon. You could even layer again, like I can take this other onion and maybe put this also in front of the sweet potato. So this is actually layered 3 times, which creates even more spatial depth. Lighting your still life is such a terrific way to get really bold highlights and strong shadows. You can get a lot more drama out of your still life. It's going to look a lot more theatrical. You can see right now on my still life, it's pretty dull looking. You can't really see the objects very well. The colors look very dark. That's what you don't want. What I would do first is turn off any overhead lights that are in the room. Overhead lights are a real big problem because they kind of flatten your entire setup, and really what you want is one light source. Oftentimes what I see is people have multiple light sources. They have a lamp on the ceiling, maybe they have a lamp over there on a desk. If you have too many lights going on, they start to conflict and get in each other's way. You can get a lot of different kinds of lights. Even a desk lamp will work just fine, but I happen to really like these clamp lights a lot because they have this clamp at the end, which means you can stick it on anything like a chair, a bookcase, whatever you want, so that way you can position this light in exactly where you want it to be. When I turn on the light and I hold the light upwards like this, it really dramatically changes the way my still life looks. For example, now there's a lot more contrast. Now, your work's not over yet though, because you need to figure out a good position for your light. Oftentimes people will just take the light, they'll just plop it there and say, okay, I'm done. But that's not really good enough. You need to really look for shadows, and you need to create shadows that you think are going to be interesting. Like for example, if you look at the purple branch right now, the purple branch doesn't really have very strong cast shadows where my light is right now. Now, if I take my light and I move it over to the right, you can see the cast shadows, they start to get very long and a lot bigger, and they're so much more visible this way. If I hold the lamp like this, the squash looks pretty flat. It doesn't really have a form shadow. The cast shadow really isn't visible. And if I take my lamp and I just move it backwards like this, you can start to see that cast shadow on the black drapery starts to emerge, and also there's a form shadow that starts to emerge on the squash. As you move the lamp around slowly, you try to find those cast shadows. If you put your light somewhere you feel like there's no shadows happening, move it somewhere else. Now that I have a lighting situation that I'm happy with, I've got really good cast shadows, I've got some really nice form shadows, I'm finally ready to start drawing. Before you start your still life, you want to make sure that you set up your easel in your still life in a way that's going to be really comfortable for you. Sometimes I see people set things up so that they have to kind of turn too much. So it's almost like you look at the still life, you look at your drawing, you look at your still life. Your neck is going to really ache after a little while if you do that. You want to set it up so you can see the still life and your drawing at the same time. For example, if you're right-handed, you want to have your drawing on this side, and then you want to have your still life on this side so you can see both at the same time. Now, if you're left-handed, it's just the opposite. Instead of the easel here, you put the easel here, and that works out just fine. If you don't have an easel and you'd rather sit down when you draw, it's pretty easy to set up. You just take a stool, and then you can take your drawing board like this, and you don't need an easel for this. You can just get a bunch of chairs and kind of stack them up, and then you just lean your drawing board like this up against the chairs, and you can still see your drawing and your still life at the same time. What you don't want to do, though, is have your drawing board kind of on a flat table like this, because then you're going to get a really distorted view of the still life. It's going to be really tough to draw. So whatever you decide to do, whether you sit, whether you stand, you always have to be able to see the entire drawing all at once. You want to think really carefully about how you place the objects on the page. So a good tool for figuring out how to do that is to use a viewfinder. So I just take the viewfinder and I just move it around in front of the still life, and this allows me to frame which section of the still life I want to do. You can also take the viewfinder and maybe hold it like this. Maybe you want to do vertical composition. So this is just a really great, quick way to sort of sort through all of your different options as far as how you want to compose the piece. Thumbnail sketches are a really terrific way to plan out in advance how you want to place the objects on your page. It may feel like a little bit more extra work because you have to do this preparatory drawing in advance, but if you have a really good thumbnail and you know where the things are going to go on the page, it makes your life so much easier when you're doing the final drawing. So it really is worth the time to do these sketches. Now, thumbnail sketches should be really quick. They shouldn't be anything that's super polished. I would say about 10 or 15 minutes per sketch is fine. You also want to make sure with a thumbnail sketch that you keep it pretty small. You don't want to make a thumbnail sketch that's too big because then it's going to take too long and you won't really be able to see the composition very well. I literally draw actual rectangles like this. This is really important because it makes me very conscious of where the corners are, where the edges are. What I see a lot of people do in their sketchbooks is instead of drawing these rectangles, they'll just start drawing the objects in the middle of the page like this, and they're not really thinking about the placement of the objects on the page. It's really hard to see that. But when you draw a literal rectangle, it's a lot easier to just be really conscious of the sort of shape of the page that you're working with. The part of the still life that I'm most interested in is more the right side of the composition. So I'm going to start out actually with the sweet potato that's on the right-hand side, and I'm going to keep it really, really simple. I'm not trying to make anything look accurate. I'm just trying to get really super basic shapes. And so don't worry about whether or not your drawing looks good. You're just trying to say where things are approximately. I'm really not worried about details. I'm thinking a lot more about where things go in the compositions. What I see sometimes is people will do, say, 6 thumbnail sketches, and every sketch looks exactly the same. At that point, it's not even worth it to do them, because if they all look the same, you're not getting any options. So the next thumbnail sketch I'm going to do is going to focus on a very different part of the still life. Now, another thing you can do with your thumbnail sketches, which will save you a lot of time, is instead of drawing them over and over again, you can actually tweak them and you can recrop them. Like, for example, I'm looking at this composition and I don't really like the way that the wine glass is so close to the edge. I actually would like to crop that. Cropping your objects, having them go off the page, is a really effective way to make the still life look bigger than it actually is. So I don't really like how this is so close. So what I can do, instead of having to redraw this entire thumbnail, is I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going to redraw the outline of the entire thumbnail like this. And I'm actually going to crop a little bit more towards the bottom as well. And so now I've taken the same sketch, but I've removed this whole section over here. So now only half of the glass is visible in that thumbnail sketch. I could do the opposite. I could actually extend it further. Like if I think this is too close up, I can draw a new line that maybe extends the composition like this. So now I'm making the composition bigger instead. And now here I'm going to make more of the lemon. I'm going to draw the stem of the artichoke down here at the bottom. And then you can just take an eraser and you just erase the original crop line that you had the first time that you drew it. And this is a huge time saver, because if every single time you want to make an adjustment, you got to redraw the entire thumbnail, it's a big pain. What I hear students say to me a lot is, oh, I did one thumbnail, I know that's my favorite one. How do you know it's your favorite one if it's the only one that exists? Keep making the thumbnail sketches. Even if you feel like the first one really is one you like a lot, you just never know what could happen later on, that maybe your 10th or 12th sketch is your favorite. So keep going, really push that variety. Now, what I'll do sometimes is once I have a bunch of sketches, like for example, here I have 4 thumbnail sketches, I'll pick maybe 2 that I'm interested in doing for the final drawing, and I might take just a little bit more time with my pencil to just get a bit more specific with the form. The artichoke that I have in the still life, I don't really see it that much in my drawing. It's actually a lot further to the left. So here's where I get to cheat. And I'm going to take the artichoke and I'm actually going to just move it over to the right. So that's a little nice little trick you can do. You can just move things around if you don't like where they are. Don't worry if the color that you're drawing with isn't the exact right shade, because you don't want to bother to take the time to do that. But you do want to get something that's close. Like for example, this cloth that's behind all of these objects, it's a little bit more blue actually, but I'm just going to use this gray color because this is the closest thing to that. And again, this is not trying to be really accurate here. I'm just trying to get a sense of what the colors are like and what kind of relationships I can expect to fill in. I mean, I like starting with the background sometimes because the background helps me establish sort of the overall mood of the entire piece. Keep in mind, when you're doing this color sketch, you're not doing it to make a beautiful drawing. You're just trying to figure out what the color relationships are. I am actually going to do a little bit more work to show the kind of shape of the drapery because that is such a big part of the composition. So for something like that, I'm just going to really briefly take some of this black crayon and just try to draw in a little bit of the form of the drapery, because the drapery is so important as far as how we see the shape of the still life. And that's going to give me an opportunity to really get a sense of the entire piece overall. When I'm ready to start my final drawing, what I find super useful is I'll take the thumbnail sketch that I'm referencing and I'll put it right on my easel. And that's really a reminder of a lot of the compositional choices that I made earlier. If you're using a black board like this, you don't want to draw with white because white is way too bright and you don't want to call so much attention to it. On the other hand, you don't want to use purple because it's too dark. I prefer a more neutral color, something like a yellow ochre, something that's darker but not so bright that it's like white. What I try to remind myself is that pretty much everything that I'm going to draw in the first few minutes of the drawing is going to get covered up. So it's a really nice way to work because you just know that no matter how many times you mess up, you're just going to eventually go over it. And that's what's so great about this technique. I'm going to start super light, and I'm not even going to try to make it look like a sweet potato. I'm not actually trying to draw the sweet potato. I'm just trying to put it somewhere. I'm looking how things line up. Like, for example, I can see that the sweet potato is here and that the little purple potato is right beneath it. So I can say if my sweet potato is here, then my little potato is probably around here. I'm drawing super light. I mean, almost to the point where you can't see the line. Because if I were to take a sheet of the black mat board and I were to sketch out my drawing like this, it's too permanent. Like, this is such a big commitment and it makes me not want to change the drawing. What I see a lot of the times is when people draw, they're not willing to make changes. They just draw it one time and say, okay, that's good enough. But nobody can do that. I mean, everybody that draws has to make changes in their drawing. It's okay if you want to exaggerate the scale of things. I mean, I'm one of those people, I just don't think that drawing's about accuracy. If I wanted this to be accurate, I would just take a photograph of it. It'd be way faster, it would come out a lot better. So I don't think there's a problem if you're doing a drawing and something's a little bit exaggerated, if something's a little bit off. I don't think that's the point of drawing. I think the point of drawing really is to interpret and to present things as you see them. And for me, I really enjoy the shape of this pepper a lot, so that I really want to kind of make it bigger than it actually is. I do want to get a lot more specific with the shape of my sweet potato because it does have this tip up here at the top, and then it does get a lot longer. And actually I'm going to let the sweet potato just go off the page because I think I made it a little bit too short. Oftentimes, it's better when you have an object that's really close to the edge of your page. Just let it go off the page or don't use it. I mean, what I could do if I wanted to, I could just take this out and then I would be fine. But I happen to like having that red pepper there because it offers a little bit more saturated color in that lower section. Once you fix one part of the drawing, it's like you got to fix 7 other parts of the drawing. So that's why it's so important when you're getting things laid out that you keep moving around. Don't just work on one section of the drawing at the time. You want to keep jumping around and working on everything all at once. I'm starting to tweak the shapes and I'm starting to get them much more specific at this point because I want to have the general outline of all of these shapes a lot more solid, because the thing is, once you start putting in a lot of color, it becomes much more difficult to make changes. At this point, because I'm just sketching with one line, I can make changes super fast. The next stage of this drawing is to throw down what I like to call a rug of color. This is one of those techniques where the more you put on the page, the better the drawing gets. So it's almost like you cannot go wrong by having more crayon on the page. So don't hold back at all. And instead of starting with the individual objects, I'll actually just go in and just fill in large areas of the background like this. And this is where you really have to use your muscles, because with these particular crayons, you really do have to use quite a bit of pressure. You can see I'm being pretty harsh about this. I'm not pulling any punches, throwing in all these colors. I'm really just throwing it down as quickly as possible, because in a lot of ways, this is kind of like the grunt work of this drawing. It's like you can't do anything until this part gets done. So it's good if you can to just be really physically aggressive. I'm pushing so hard that my drawing board's shaking. So I would say if you're drawing like this, your drawing board's not shaking, you're not pressing hard enough. And this is going to give me a really good sense of light and dark, which wasn't really present before, because now I have a really bright kind of object. And here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hint a little bit at the shadow, but eventually later on I'm going to fill that in with gray. And then over here at the top, there is quite a bit of highlight. Cover everything. You want to get to the point where nothing of the original black map board is visible. You want all of it to just completely disappear. The sweet potato really is dramatic in terms of its shadow. So I'm going to stick with this peach color on this side, and then I'm going to switch over to this brown color on this side. The problem with yellow as a color is that it's an inherently transparent color, which means if I just use straight yellow, it's always going to look a little see-through. So what I recommend, if you want to get a really kind of solid, brilliant yellow, instead start with white first. Now when I take the yellow and I put the yellow on top, the yellow has a much more vibrant, rich surface to it, and that's because it has the white behind it. These crayons break all the time, so don't freak out if they break, because they always do, and it's fine. I actually like them better when they're in smaller pieces because they're easier to draw with. This entire first layer, none of it's going to show. This is all going to get covered up like 10 times over, and that's why I can feel so free and confident about just putting down whatever I want and not worrying about it. I mean, I think this technique, in a lot of ways, it's really similar to painting, because what I like about painting is that if you don't like the way something looks, you just paint over it. Look at these really bright highlights. So they're coming up and sort of defining the side, and towards the bottom it's actually very bright. The black cloth is a little bit trickier because what's kind of nice about this is it's on black board, so you don't have to work as hard, but I don't want these yellow outlines showing because they're ugly. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to take some black and I'm just kind of tone them down a little bit. This is the one time when I think I would want to draw lightly instead of pressing down so hard, just to show the highlights that are coming through. I mean, this area back here really is very dark, so I don't really need to work that hard to make it that articulate. The background is like this big blob, and I kind of feel like I don't know what's going on. So what I want to do is take maybe like a darker bluish color, and I'm going to just try to get a better handle on sort of the shape of the drapery. You keep making corrections. Like here I can see that I didn't put enough of that cloth. I'm also looking for the biggest shadows. I'm not looking for the little ones. Like for example, there's a shadow behind the ugly purple. I don't know why I keep calling it ugly. I just think it's ugly. But anyway, I'm going to take the blue back here, and there's a really big shadow behind the purple potato. And so this one I really am going to kind of go to town and fill this in quite a bit. You really start layering the colors. This is when it gets really fun. Like this is the fun part that you've been waiting for, and you can see even just this quick little sort of pass of purple that I'm putting in throughout the entire piece is already starting to make things look a lot richer than they were before. And if I layer some of this brown, it just gets the blue and the purple to calm down a little bit more, because while the background is really important, the background isn't really what we want to jump out. And so if I'm able to kind of get the blue and the purple to not be quite so prominent, what's starting to happen with the addition of the brown and the shadows is that the shadows don't stand out so much, which is a good thing. You don't want them to be calling attention to themselves too much. There's a lot of highlight here, quite a bit of highlight here. And now for the highlights, you really got to press hard. Like you really have to just act like your life depended on it. Okay, what's the part of the drawing that needs the most work? What's the part that really has a lot of problems? For me, it would definitely be this pepper, because the color is nowhere near where it should be, and also the shape of it is really off. It's very helpful actually to draw around the pepper. So instead of trying to fix the pepper, I fix the background around the pepper. So I'll take the pepper and maybe take some of this purple that's back here and push some of the purple in to make the pepper a little bit rounder, because the pepper isn't quite as straight as I have it. So I'm going to go in and shave little sections of the pepper off the side using the background like this. I am going to use just a little bit of black just for clarity. I mean, I sort of think about black in color. It's like your secret weapon. Like you only use it when you have to use it. You only use it in very small quantities. And in here, I just really need the black to help clarify some of the forms because the forms are getting super confusing at this point. I'm going to start to put in these little dots of highlight like this. I'm not going to try to finish them. I'm just putting them there so that I know that that's what they're supposed to be, because later on, I'm going to take some fixative. I'm going to put fixative over this, and that's going to create this barrier, and it's going to allow me to make the whites even brighter. I'm looking at these very abstractly. I think a lot of people get very worried about, oh, is it going to look realistic? Does it look like a wine glass? I think the second you start bothering yourself about that, that's when you're just doomed. I think that if you can sort of think about it more as a series of abstract shapes, that's the better way to think about it, because then you're not distracted about, does it look like this? Does it look like that? Don't worry if you're working on your drawing and you feel like it got worse, because that's going to happen. I mean, drawings don't get progressively better all the time. In fact, usually they get worse before they get better. My grip of the crayon is different. Up until this point, I'd been drawing like this before, but now I'm holding my crayon very much like a pencil. And so this is a very different kind of grip than what I'd been doing before, because I just need way more control. This is a pretty harsh edge. And then up here, this is also a very harsh edge. So that's something to be very conscious of. Do you want to have really smooth surfaces like this, or do you want something that's really harsh? This is what's called reflected light, where the side of the creamer has just a little bit of light coming in on the side. And then this section here is the shadow core. So that shadow core area, I'm going to do a little bit of blue because actually the purple is reflecting onto here. So there is a little bit of purpley blue-gray down the middle. Another thing that's also complicating this creamer is there's a cast shadow here, which is coming from the drapery. So I also have to address that. And that cast shadow has a roundness that cuts across the bottom of the creamer like this. And that's a whole separate shadow. So you have a cast shadow here and you have a form shadow here. Those are two very different kinds of shadows, and you can't draw them the same way because they really have different kinds of qualities. My pace of drawing has really slowed down. In the beginning part of this process, I was like all over the place. I was moving everywhere. I'm not doing that anymore. Now I'm starting to zoom in on some of these smaller areas, and I'm starting to take my time more. One thing that's really good to keep in mind as you work on your drawing is what direction your strokes are going in. I think sometimes if you're drawing something like, for example, the persimmon, which is really smooth, it sort of feels like you shouldn't show your strokes at all. But for example, the sweet potato that I'm drawing, it's a really textured object. So in this object, I'm going to try to be really conscious about the direction of the stroke. And so sometimes I'm going this way, other times I'm going to move this way. Here, I really do want to use black because what I want to show are these like little nooks and crannies, like there's these little dots in here. It's almost like the sweet potato's got like freckles. I'm just making all kinds of changes because I can tell my first pass was a mess. But if you ask me, I think it's a lot easier to just make a big mess and then clean it up. Because what I see a lot of the times is people try to get it right. I mean, whatever that's supposed to mean. People try to kind of nail it the first time through. First of all, that's really slow. Second of all, it's no fun. I'm going to get some of the white and build up heavier patches of white, and then I'm going to put yellow on top of it. Again, remembering that because yellow is very much a transparent color, it really does need that layer of white. I need to clean up this edge of this artichoke, which got a little bit sloppy. I mean, this is where the advantage of working on a black board really comes in handy. I mean, if this was a white sheet of paper, there's no way I could get away with that. But with a black board like this, you really can. I asked myself, okay, do I really want that area to jump out that much? Can I make that area a little bit more subtle? And I think somebody who was really, really good at that was Caravaggio. Like if you look at a Caravaggio painting, he really knew what to emphasize,
what to let sink back into that darkness. Or if you look at the artist George de la Tour, he had these beautiful, intimate drawings of people in candlelight. And he again was somebody who really knew how to use the darkness of the background really to his advantage. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to draw it. And just because it's that green doesn't mean it has to be that green. I mean, you can heighten it up quite a bit. I mean, I'm looking at this pepper that I'm drawing, and I think I made it way more green than it actually is. I think it's actually a lot more kind of limey when I think about it, but I'm going to leave it that way because I think that's fine.
Sometimes I'll take my drawing and I'll put it really, really far away from me. So say like 30 feet from where I'm standing, and I'll just look at the entire composition and I'll just ask myself which area I really feel needs some work. The other thing that's very helpful is just to put it away for the day, because sometimes you're working on the drawing, you're staring at it for many hours on end. It's really hard to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the painting or drawing, put it somewhere where I can't see it, take it out in a week or so, and then make some final decisions, because at that point, you really do have kind of almost a new pair of eyes looking at the work, and then you can decide where you want to go from there.